being a multi-studio owner, having a lot of experience in looking for sites and locations for your studios, from your knowledge, what would you say are the most important things to look for when looking for real estate?
The real estate piece is probably the most underestimated. If it's your first time in commercial real estate, I was a homeowner before I did this. It's nothing like buying a home. It's nothing like buying an apartment. So I think just going into it with the right mindset, even just a Google search of like, what's the temperament I should have as a person, and going into looking for a real estate space on the temperament of not seeming too eager. Definitely having a broker that works for you. Out of state is my opinion, but having someone who's working for you, not going to the landlords yourself, but not seeming too eager, not falling in love with one particular space. For example, the place we are in Foxborough, Mass, I think is like the best location we could have ever had. But we fell into it. It was our fourth choice. So I think not falling in love with the space, being open to other spaces is probably the first thing. You want the landlord to sell you on the space. You don't want to be begging that landlord for the space. I think in the long term, that's not really a great start to a 10-year relationship. And then I think once you get the temperament right, you're open, you're relaxed to finding spaces. I think simple things to look for would be something like parking. I kind of underestimated the need for parking. If you're in a city location, a really urban area, like we are when we're closer to Providence in the Rhode Island studio, it's different. But as far as the suburbs, having a 36-person Saturday, there's going to be 30 cars rolling in. So I think if parking is a challenge, that's a barrier for your members to join. So I look for really good parking. And then the second thing I look for is just finding a landlord that's willing to do most of the work. So I think like minimizing that construction cost any way you can is going to be really important. So if you can find a landlord that will build a significant portion of your studio, or maybe even a space that's already suited for a gym. This was a paint shop, believe it or not. So it was already wide open. The ceiling was already exposed. It already had existing bathrooms. So we really just did some demo, put in the flooring. So I wouldn't say it was simple, but again, we also strategically pick landlords that are willing to do a significant portion of the build as opposed to giving us TI. Because when you get TI, you're expected to do the construction yourself, and then the landlord gives you money towards that. But again, if you can convince the landlord to do your work, usually you get keys in hand after the work is done, and then the rent-free period that you negotiated begins. Whereas if they give you the keys, construction has so many delays, especially right now. So I think instead of taking on the burden of the unknown with construction and delays, if you can get a landlord that's willing to do most of your build, that would be, I would pick a space just for that if I could. Like if I had like a landlord willing to do nothing, I've done it before. A landlord willing to do nothing, but I love the location, or something a little bit different location, but the landlord was willing to work with me. At 45, people are going to find this no matter where you are. My first at 45 was in the upstairs of a dilapidated building in basically one of the worst areas in Buffalo. So, I mean, and that studio was popping. It was so fun, like vibrant, lively community. So you can literally put, and Sunset F45 has been there, not to go off about that one, but I love it. That Sunset F45 has been there. That community has been rising. So F45, people will find you where you are. I would pick a space that's right for F45 and for you as a tenant, as opposed to something that you're like going to pay more for. There's amazing plazas that have all the anthropology, and you're going to pay $100 a square foot for it. But is that going to be worth it for F45? If you can build in profitability and trust that F45 is the best, people are going to find you. So, and then the last thing I would look for is just neighbors. Who are your neighbors? You don't need to have Crate and Barrel as your neighbor and be in the top amazing plaza, but I try to stay away from, those budget neighbors. Like, we are next to a Supercuts here and we do really well, but I try to stay away from like a Dollar Tree or something. This is a premium offering, so I do want to be surrounded by more premium offerings if I can.
Yeah, I'll jump in if that's okay, but I've looked at literally hundreds of locations. And so, one thing that F45 do have is a mapping tool. We actually utilize another mapping tool as well, but the mapping tool is actually quite useful. It does give you some demographics. I would always look into the demographics of a particular territory. I think the F45 tool gives you sort of average household income, also gives you population statistics. Ideally, you're looking for, anywhere between 10 and 15,000 people between 25 and 45 years old, which is kind of the 20-year sort of gap that we want. And you can find tools off the shelf as well if you want to get into deeper analytics. The data can tell you so much when you're sort of trying to narrow down, but then I would really recommend getting on the floor, on the ground, and boots on the ground, actually doing, the site tours yourself, and also looking at the other co-tenants, as Skylar has said. An exercise we went through was looking at, the top performing F45s from 2019. We got very, very granular around data and geofencing those locations and tagging phones and following phones to different co-tenants. And, there's about 50 odd different co-tenants that that are going to be good for you. And if you can find out what those co-tenants are, and get an understanding, where they're located, if you can find plazas that have, 2, 3, 4 of those co-tenants, you're going to do well in that plaza, in that center. But as Skylar said, the way we market these things is all digital marketing. People are going to find you, and you don't necessarily need to be, in a $100 per square foot, location, paying through the nose. Some of our most profitable studios aren't in, the marquee locations, because the rent is lower, but we can still charge, we still charge the same price for the membership, and they actually do better than some of the more marquee locations. So location is important, but it's not the be all and end all. But if you can find something, we always budget for, anything under $10,000 gross a month, is, for us is a good metric to use on the go forward. And that's what we're looking for, 2,500 to 3,500 square feet for gross $10,000 all in per month. And I think you're doing okay, and you'll do well if you can find those locations, from a profitability standpoint.
Awesome. You're absolutely right about the location thing. I know here in London, you wouldn't even know an F45 is there. When you walking, there's F45 Oxford Circus. It's actually in an old underground car park. And you're like, oh, there's a little F45 sign. Go down the stairs and it's absolutely pumping, back-to-back classes. They're always busy. So, you don't have to have that, as you said, a shop front to have an F45. A lot of locations would be places you wouldn't even realize that there is an F45 besides the little light up sign. So you're absolutely right.